everybody! I'm back again! It's the Nutty Professor! We've had a little break, a little hiatus, more due to production issues. One of my crew is out of the country, another one is busy with some personal things. So now we're kind of back on track. I'm hanging in there. I was going to say that I am now 7 weeks clean, and that 7 weeks is from a fall, but not the substance. That fall was a controlled burn. Remember from the previous series, I have my system of PATAP, and controlled burns are a lesser substance. So 7 weeks clean from that controlled burn. However, I'm hesitating now in using words like clean, quote, clean, unquote, because I'm trying to move towards a system and a language and an approach to addiction that isn't based in 12 steps, in religion, in traditional clinical psychology. And a lot of the words that we use, and remember in that first series, I did come up with some of my own words, and I had taban, and I had point, personification of it, and I had RCE, rechanneling of energy. So I want to keep working on that today because I'm not comfortable with saying clean. When I say 7 weeks clean, that implies that the other thing is dirty, quote unquote. It's kind of judgmental. And when I say fall, see, fall again. If you think about it, fall from grace. It's kind of, there's a religious element to it, So I discussed some of this with my analyst in my last session, and he asked me, what words would you prefer to use? And I said, I don't know. It's a work in progress. I said, I'm working on it. I said, I'm going to talk about it in my podcast and see if I can come up with some words. So instead of fall, I might not use this, but I'm thinking about how about something like portal. You're going to another place. But as I said, it's a work in progress. Now, sober, same thing, but I'm willing to use sobriety. For now, I'm using clean, I'm using fall, I'm using those terms, but I'm just trying to come up with alternate words, if at all possible. Now, there's another one that occurred to me. Civilians often say to me, when I used to say, I've been clean so long, whatever, civilians would say, stay strong! And I know they mean well, but it occurred to me that civilians don't really get that the people who remain in an addiction, it requires a lot of strength. I've talked about this in previous podcasts, how the people who are not turning back, in my system, remember, you've got the ones who turn back and the ones who don't turn back. So the people who don't have a list, who aren't putting the energy into turning back, who live in that world every day, it's a tremendous struggle. It is, it takes a lot of strength to survive. So to say to me, be strong, I think kind of takes away from the people, because that world, we might not approve of it, but it still requires a lot of strength, to survive in that world, So my producer, my former student, he once said to me when I said, I'm struggling a bit, and I've been so many weeks clean, for lack of a better term, and he gave me a Chinese term. It's Cantonese, and it translates as add oil. And the thing I like about that is that add oil, it's non-judgmental. You're saying to someone, have some fuel, go for it, It's like, go for it, So it can work either side. If you want to stay clean and you want to battle and you want to turn back, go for it, add oil, get your fuel. But if you're on the other path, you can say that to somebody who's not turning back. You can say, add oil, go for it, be safe, get your stuff, do what you need to do, So that's one term that I have kind of come up with. I've adapted it. I don't think I'm using it exactly the way that it should be used in Chinese, but I've adapted it. So, I kind of like the add oil, Another term, when talking about struggling, in the first series I said I don't like the term recovering addict, and I don't like addict, I prefer junkie. Some people don't like it, but it depends on who's using it and how they're using it. So and as I said in that first series, junkie doesn't have to be the way I'm using it. It doesn't have to be about drugs. I mean, you could be a car junkie like my father. He had 10 cars, My father's got a huge collection of crystal, I've called him a crystal junkie. So it's anything that you are addicted to, So that's the way I've been using the word, However, in the first series, I also suggested the word struggler. Now, I've thought about it, and I'm okay with struggler, but the cravings, when they come, and they're so strong that struggler doesn't even convey how powerful the cravings are. It's a struggle, but it's more like a battle, and that's why I'm back to I'm willing to use struggler, but I'm back to using a battle term. Now, the first podcast of the series, the one titled I'm Back, the thumbnail was of me sitting in my ego chair, but the ego chair was represented from Game of Thrones. So it was this all these swords, and I was like a warrior holding a sword with armor, and I kind of like that image, So if you want to go one step up from struggler, I was thinking about something like ITWARRIOR, or warrior of it, and that comes from, remember, last session we talked about Freud, and we talked about id, id and superego, and that's the battle. The battle is between the id and the superego. Okay, so now the it can also be it, So and I was thinking perhaps warrior of it. Okay, WARRIOIT, something like that. Okay, or it warrior. So again, another addition to our PATAP terms. Personalized approach to addictions, So I'm thinking, again, I'm just playing around with it. I'm playing around with the words. And remember, going back to our last podcast, the battle in Freudian terms is between the id, I want it now, whatever it is. Whether it is, a substance, or even Coca-Cola. It's I want it now. I don't want to wait. And the superego is always, you can't have it. Even Coca-Cola is not good for you. It's got caffeine, it's got, sugar, it's all this shit. So that's the battle. And the ego is in the middle, So that's our battle. So I'm considering a strong form of struggler. We can always say it warrior or warrior of it. Now, this actually leads me to, and there are other terms. There's relapse, there's backsliding. Now, backsliding is when an addict, goes back and, engages in their substance, or they gamble, or whatever the activity substance is. But backsliding is directly out of religion. That actually comes from Christianity. So I've been thinking about all of this, and during the last few weeks, I have been trying to rechannel energy. I've been doing my RCE. I've been writing. I've been reading a lot. I've been going to see a lot of movies. So I've been rechanneling energy, and some of the reading I've done, I reread some material about Roland Barthes, and it's spelled B-A-R-T-H-E-S, Roland, and it's pronounced Barthes. He was a French semiotician, philosopher, literary critic, linguist, and his movement was known as deconstructionism or post-structuralism, and he died in 1980. He was killed by a laundry truck, and he was very popular as a theorist. It was very in to be deconstructivist or post-structuralist back in the 80s if you were an intellectual, and he talks about signs and signifiers, and language, and it's a sort of a more abstract level. And I have been thinking about words and language and meanings and signs and signifiers, but I think a simpler, a more straightforward approach for what I need as a theoretical framework right now will be Whorf. Benjamin Lee Whorf. And I did mention the Whorfian linguistic determinism hypothesis in the first podcast, because my student had taken a course with me, and I was very big in those days. I used to talk a lot about, And now the reason that I was big on the Whorfian linguistic determinism hypothesis was that, the hypothesis states that language, the strong form of the hypothesis is language determines thought. So if you want to change the way that people think about groups, and that was one of the first uses of it, was you have the, that's sort of where politically correct language came from, And at first, I was a proponent of politically correct language. I'm not as strong a proponent of it now as I used to be, because I think there are some issues with it, But, the idea was, if you have the word policeman, you have the word fireman, you're going to think of that profession as male, So the idea was you change the way people think, you change the thought by changing the language. So you change it from fireman to firefighter. You change it from a policeman to police officer, And we have done this, and it has worked up to a point, but then there has also been a backlash, and there's been issues with that, So, and the hypothesis is also called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. The most famous example, and there's problems with the example too, but the famous example back then was that, quote, Eskimos, unquote, And I think it's interesting that just that term illustrates the theory itself, because Eskimo itself was a derogatory term. I think it meant eater of raw fish, So I think then the politically correct term became Inuit, and now I think it's something else, So, but they used to say that the Inuit had, let's say, 50 words for snow. So if you have, we have one word for snow in English, and then you can use adjectives to describe what kind of snow it is. But in Inuit, you have 50 different words. You will see snow differently, You'll see 50 different things when you see it, Now that's the strong form of the hypothesis. However, it ended up being modified to the kind of weaker form, and the weaker form, and that's harder to argue with. The weaker form is that language doesn't necessarily determine thought, it influences thought, So that brings us back to what I've been doing here, What I've been doing here is I've been trying to change the way that we think about, that I think, and I'm not doing this generally I'm not telling everyone else to use these words. These are the words that, this is my personal approach to addiction. Remember? PATAP, personal, mine, So I'm trying to come up with the words that I feel comfortable with, that work for me, that will help me battle my cravings. And, if this word works better, then I prefer this word. And if this word, I feel that it has religious orientations, like falling, then I'll try to come up with another word. And as I said, I do like, struggler is okay, but you know, warrior gives you more of an idea of the battle, and it can go both ways. I mean, you know, because in a battle, there's always two sides, and the other side also has a cause, you know. So so that's what I've been thinking about, and this also does lead back to, you know, what we talked about in the last podcast with Freud and the framework and the battle. We can also have ego defense mechanisms because, and some people will say, some of the 12-step people will say that I am being defensive in not wanting to accept certain aspects of addiction, you know, and I might be in a form of denial. But let's keep that for the next podcast. So for today, I just want to say, nice to be back. I'll see you again soon, and hopefully when I come back, I'll have some alternate words to fall and clean. It might come to me. I'll work on it. So, and I'm going to do a car podcast, so watch that one as well, you know. That's a rechanneling of energy. We did a Corvette one last time, and we're going to do a Porsche one. So, see you soon, you know. Bye from the Nutty Professor. Bye.